The garden gate was already open when Rosalind Thorne arrived, and the man standing inside it held a document bearing the seal of Lord Hargrove's estate, an order to raise every bed, uproot every hedge, and salt the earth of the Physic garden she had spent 7 years cultivating. "You have until morning," the solicitor said, not meeting her eyes. "The new owner wants the land cleared for stables." 3 weeks later, she would be standing in a ballroom with that same document in her hand, facing down a man who had tried to destroy everything she had grown, while the one person in the room who understood what grew in that soil stood beside her with his hand barely touching the small of her back. Cold fingers, steady pressure, and a silence that said he would follow wherever she led. But that was later. That was after the blood, and the debt, and the fury. Everything began again the night she found him in the garden, 6 months before. The rain had not stopped for 3 days, and the soil in the lower beds had turned to something between clay and grief. Rosalind knelt in it anyway, her lantern hung from the iron hook she had driven into the stone wall years ago, because the valerian would drown if she did not redirect the water before dawn. She was 31 years old, a widow with a 40-year lease on a quarter-acre of walled garden behind the Thorne Apothecary shop in Bath. She made her living selling tinctures, salves, and tisanes to people who could not afford physicians and did not trust them besides. The garden was her livelihood, her inheritance from a husband who had died of fever 5 years past. The only thing in her life that grew exactly as she tended it. She smelled him before she saw him, copper and wet wool and something underneath, like the air before lightning. He was lying against the far wall, half hidden by the overhanging rosemary, and at first she thought someone had left a bundle of old clothes in her garden. Then the bundle moved. "If you are sleeping rough, there is a shelter on Avon Street," she said, keeping her voice steady because steadiness was what she had instead of a locked door. She lifted the lantern higher. The man's face caught the light, and Rosalind's hand went still on the lantern hook. She knew that face. She had known it 8 years ago, when she was 23 and newly married, and he had come to her husband's shop to buy foxglove tincture in quantities that made no medical sense. She had asked him what it was for. He had looked at her as though no one had asked him a direct question in a very long time, said, "It steadies a heart that has forgotten its rhythm." His name was Alistair Vane. He had been a customer for 3 months, always after dark, always foxglove, always that same careful courtesy. Then he had vanished without explanation. Her husband had said, "Some customers are seasonal, Rosalind," and she had not believed him, but had let it go because she was young, and there were medicines to mix. Now Alistair Vane was lying in her garden in the rain, and his skin was the color of old paper, and he was not breathing. She counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds with no rise of his chest, 6, 7, then a shallow, shuddering intake, as though his body had remembered the motion only reluctantly. Rosalind set the lantern down, knelt beside him, and pressed her fingers to his throat. His pulse was there, barely. It stuttered like a watch with a broken spring. "Mr. Vane," she said, "can you hear me?" His eyes opened. They were the dark gray she remembered, but something behind them had changed, a depth that had not been there before, or that she had been too young to recognize. "Rosalind Thorne," he said, and his voice cracked on her name like ice on a warming stone. "You should not help me." "You are in my garden," she said. "Everything in my garden is my responsibility." She counted the anomalies as she worked. His skin was cold as the flagstones, his clothes were soaked, but he was not shivering, and when she lifted his arm to check for injury, it weighed almost nothing, as though his bones were hollow. She found no wound, no blood, no obvious cause for his collapse. But the foxglove bed she had planted along the south wall, the same plant he had bought tinctures of for 3 months 8 years ago, was bending toward him, every stem leaning as though he were the sun. She noticed. She filed it away. She dragged him into the potting shed, wrapped him in the horse blanket she kept for frost nights, went to brew a strong foxglove tisane, because it was the only thing she knew he responded to. By morning he was gone. The blanket was folded with military precision on the bench, and beside it lay a single coin. Not English currency, but something older, heavier, stamped with a symbol she did not recognize. The foxglove along the south wall had bloomed overnight, 6 weeks ahead of season. Rosalind picked up the coin, turned it 3 times in her fingers. She always counted, and put it in the drawer where she kept things she intended to understand later. The strangeness began 4 days after. She woke at 3 in the morning knowing someone was standing outside the garden wall. Not hearing them. Knowing. The certainty sat in her chest like a second heartbeat, steady and alien. She went to the window and saw nothing. But the valerian was blooming in the dark and the comfrey had spread 6 inches in a direction it had never grown before. Toward the lane. The next night, she dreamed of a room she had never seen, paneled in dark wood, with a fire burning low and a man sitting beside it, reading a book she could almost see the title of. His hand turned a page, and she felt the paper under her own fingers. On the third day, a woman came to the shop. She was tall, expensively dressed, with the kind of beauty that made other women feel unfinished. She bought nothing. She looked at Rosalind the way a jeweler looks at a setting, evaluating what it holds. "You have something that belongs to someone else," the woman said. "I have a shop full of things I grew myself," Rosalind said. "You will have to be more specific. I count my inventory weekly. Nothing here belongs to anyone but me." The woman smiled. It did not reach her eyes. "A debt was activated when you helped him. You would not understand the mechanism. But he owes you now, and that means you are visible to all of us." She placed a card on the counter. The name read, Lady Sybil Ashworth. "When you are ready to discuss terms, send word." She left. The bell above the door rang 3 times after she was gone, though no one touched it. Rosalind counted to 10, locked the shop, and went into the garden. She stood among the foxglove, still impossibly in bloom, and said to the empty air, "If you can hear me, Mr. Vane, you have exactly until sunset to come here and explain what you have done to my life." He came at dusk. He looked stronger than he had in the rain, though still too pale, still moving with that careful economy that she now recognized not as frailty, but as restraint, the way a large dog moves slowly through a room full of glass. "You activated a blood oath," he said, standing at the garden gate as though he needed permission to enter. "When you gave me shelter and healing, freely, without being asked. In my kind, that creates a bond that cannot be dissolved without consequences." "Your kind," Rosalind repeated. She was standing 3 beds away from him, a row of lavender between them. She counted the lavender stems, 14. "Say it plainly." "Say it. I am a vampire. I have been alive for 400 years. The foxglove you grow? I do not know why, but it is the only thing in this world that eases the mechanism of my borrowed heartbeat. You have been saving my life for 7 years without knowing it, and I have been buying your tinctures through intermediaries since the night I left Bath." The garden was very quiet. A blackbird sang 3 notes and stopped. "You left," Rosalind said, and the fury arrived like weather, sudden, total, and earned. "You left 8 years ago without a word. You came back and collapsed in my garden like a parcel no one signed for. You activated some oath that has made me visible to a woman who looks at people the way a hawk looks at mice, and you are standing at my gate explaining this as though it is a mildly inconvenient postal error." She picked a stem of lavender and broke it between her fingers. The scent hit the air like a slap. "Come inside, sit down, and tell me every single thing because I count my debts, Mr. Vane, and I do not carry ones I did not choose." He came inside. He sat on the bench in the potting shed, and he told her. He told her about the blood oath, an ancient binding that activated when a mortal freely aided a vampire in extremis. It linked them. Not romantically, not magically in any way she would feel as compulsion, but it made her known to vampire kind, a marked creditor in a world that did not forgive debts. "Lady Ashworth," Rosalind said, "she knows. She has known about me for a century. She is older than I am, and she considers Bath her territory, A blood oath in her domain is leverage. She will try to use you to control me, or demand I surrender the oath to her, which would give her power over both of us. And you cannot simply dissolve it. Not without. He stopped. His hands, resting on his knees, were very still. The dissolution requires one of us to renounce the bond entirely. If I renounce, the backlash falls on you. If you renounce, it falls on me. Either way, one of us suffers. So we are trapped. Yes. Rosalind counted to 5. Then we had better find a third option, she said. Because I do not accept traps, Mr. Vane. I uproot them. Her friend and shop assistant, Nell Bancroft, arrived the next morning with flour on her sleeves and opinions on her tongue. Nell was 45, built like a wardrobe, and had the kind of face that made liars confess before she asked a question. She had been Rosalind's late husband's cousin and had stayed on because, as she put it, someone has to mind the till while you talk to plants. There is a man's coat hanging in the potting shed, Nell said, setting down a basket of bread. Either you have taken a lodger or you have finally lost your mind. I am comfortable with either explanation. He is a customer, Rosalind said. He is a customer who left his coat overnight, in December, in Bath. Nell cut the bread with the kind of precision that suggested she was imagining it was someone's excuses. Rosalind, I have known you for 9 years. You count everything. You measure twice. You do not let strangers leave coats in your shed. Who is he? Alistair Vane. He used to buy foxglove from Edward. Nell's knife stopped. The night customer. The one you asked about 3 times and then stopped asking about. She looked at Rosalind with the expression of someone who has just solved a puzzle she did not know she was holding. He's back. He is back, and he has brought trouble. They always do. The interesting ones always do. Nell resumed cutting. Tell me everything. Start with why the foxglove is blooming in December. Rosalind told her most of it, not the word vampire, not yet, but the oath, the binding, the woman who had come to the shop. Nell listened the way she always did, with her hands busy and her eyes sharp. So this Lady Ashworth wants leverage over him, and you are the lever, Nell said. And he cannot break the bond without hurting you. Correct. And you cannot break it without hurting him. Also correct. Rosalind, I count 3 options. You find a way to change the terms of the bond. You find something Lady Ashworth wants more than leverage. Or you make yourself so inconvenient that she decides you are not worth the trouble. She dusted flour from her hands. I recommend the third. You are exceptionally good at being inconvenient. Over the following weeks, Rosalind saw Alistair almost every evening. He came to the garden after dark, always after dark, and they worked side by side among the beds. He knew more about plants than any man she had met, though his knowledge was centuries out of date and occasionally startling. That variety of sage was used in Constantinople for embalming, he said once, and she had looked at him and said, I use it for sausages, but thank you for the history. He almost smiled. She counted it. 1, the first almost smile, because she was beginning to catalogue the ways his face changed when he forgot to guard it. She discovered things about him in pieces. His hands were gentle with the seedlings, but he would not touch the rosemary. It burned him, he said, and she saw the faint marks it left on his fingers and filed that away too. He read poetry in languages she did not recognize. He listened to her count. She counted everything aloud, stems and seeds and measurements and stars. And one evening he said, You count to make the world hold still. She had not known that about herself until he said it. She noticed the cold of his skin when their hands met, reaching for the same trowel. She noticed that he cast no shadow when the lantern hung behind him. She noticed that the garden grew faster when he was near, as though the soil recognized him as something both old and necessary. But Lady Ashworth was not idle. The first strike came as a legal notice. The lease on Rosalind's garden, the 40-year lease her husband had secured, was being challenged. The land, it seemed, had been recently purchased by a new owner, Lord Hargrove, a name Rosalind did not recognize, but Nell did. Hargrove is Lady Ashworth's creature, Nell said, reading the notice with her jaw set. He buys property for people who do not want their names on deeds. She is coming for your garden, Rosalind. She cannot break a 40-year lease. She can if she finds a flaw in the original contract, and she has solicitors who find flaws the way dogs find bones. Nell folded the notice. This is the lever. She takes your garden, she takes your livelihood, and then she offers to give it back, if you surrender the oath. Rosalind stood in the garden that evening, counting the foxglove stems, 43, more than she had ever grown, and felt the fear settle into her like frost. Not for herself, for the garden, for 7 years of careful tending, of knowledge pressed into soil, of medicines that kept half a neighborhood breathing through winter. Alistair found her there. He stood at the gate, he always waited at the gate, and said, "I heard." "She is trying to burn my garden," Rosalind said. "Not with fire, with paper, but the result is the same. Let me stop her. I have resources. I have—" "No." She turned to face him. The lantern was behind her, and she saw that he had no shadow, and she did not look away. "This is my garden, my lease, my fight. If you solve it for me, she wins a different way. She proves I need you, that the oath makes me dependent, that I am the lever she thinks I am." She counted to 3. "I need you to trust me to fight this." He was quiet for a long time. The foxglove leaned toward him, patient as always. "I trust you," he said. She pulled away from him after that. Not physically, but in the careful way she had learned to protect things she could not afford to lose. She stopped lingering in the garden after dark. She kept their conversations brief and practical. She told herself it was strategy. Nell, who was not fooled by anything, said, "You are being stubborn, he is being patient. Between the two of you, the garden is the only one showing any sense." "I cannot afford to want something while I am trying to save everything else," Rosalind said. "My dear girl," Nell said, "that is exactly when wanting matters most." Rosalind went looking for the third option Nell had described, a way to change the terms. She spent 3 weeks in the Bath Lending Library, reading every obscure text on old contracts, binding agreements, and historical precedents for oath law. She consulted Mr. Aldridge, the elderly solicitor who had drawn up her husband's lease. She counted pages, counted precedents, counted days until Ashworth's challenge reached the magistrate. She found something, buried in a treatise on medieval contract law, about mutual bonds. A debt could not be dissolved without harm, but it could be transformed from an involuntary binding into a voluntary covenant if both parties chose freely and equally to rewrite the terms. The transformation required both parties to give something of equal value, not surrender, not sacrifice, but exchange. She brought the idea to Alistair on a Tuesday evening, standing in the garden with the book open between them. "A voluntary covenant," he said. He was looking at her, not the book. "Rosalind, do you understand what that means? It would bind us permanently, not as debtor and creditor, as partners." "I understand what it means," she said. Her heart was beating in a way she could count. 1, 2, 3, faster than usual, and she did not step back. But the plan required time, time to prepare, time to find the right form of exchange, time to ensure the transformation would hold. And Lady Ashworth did not give them time. The second strike came at a public assembly in the Bath Guildhall. Rosalind was there to present her case for the lease to a gathering of local property holders. She had her documents in order, her precedents memorized, her argument prepared. She stood at the front of the room, steady as she had ever been. Lady Ashworth was already there. She rose before Rosalind could speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ashworth said, and her voice carried the room the way cold carries through glass. "Before Mrs. Thorne presents her case, I must raise a concern of public safety. The garden in question grows foxglove, digitalis, in quantities far exceeding any legitimate apothecary need. I have here a report from a London physician suggesting that such quantities indicate either incompetence or something more troubling. She set a paper on the table. I move that the garden be seized and cleared pending investigation. The room shifted. Rosalind felt it. The pulling away, the sudden suspicion. "The foxglove in my garden," Rosalind said. Her voice did not shake because she had been steady her whole life and she was not going to stop now. "Produces tinctures that serve 47 regular customers in this city, including 6 who would not survive the winter without them. I count my plants, Lady Ashworth. I count my customers. I count my dosages. Every gram is documented, every sale recorded, every patient known to me by name." She opened her own ledger and set it beside Ashworth's paper. "Your London physician has never visited my garden. I count 3 errors in his report. Shall I name them?" The room held its breath. Ashworth's smile thinned. But the motion was seconded by Lord Hargrove, who sat in the 3rd row looking bored and entitled, and the investigation was approved. The garden would be reviewed. Until then, she could not sell, could not distribute, could not tend. She was locked out of her own garden. That night, Alistair came to the shop. He stood in the doorway, and the candles on the counter steadied in his presence, flames drawing upright as though attending. "She is dismantling everything I have," Rosalind said. She was not crying. She was counting. The jars on the shelf, 14, the bundles of dried herbs, 23, the days until the investigation concluded, unknown. "She does not even want the garden. She wants me desperate enough to surrender the oath. Let me. If you say, 'Let me handle this,' I will throw a jar of comfrey at your head." He stopped. Then very quietly he said, "I was going to say, let me help you, not instead of you, beside you." She looked at him. The candles burned steady. The shop smelled of rosemary and dried chamomile and the cold air that always surrounded him. He was standing very still, the way he always stood, not quite at ease, but willing to wait. "What do you have?" she said. 400 years of watching people like Ashworth destroy things, and the knowledge that they always leave a record of their methods. She purchased the land through Hargrove. There will be a document trail. She challenged your lease with a physician's report. That physician can be found. She presented herself as a concerned citizen, but she has been buying property around your garden for months. I can trace every purchase. You are offering me evidence. I am offering you ammunition. You choose when and where to fire it." Rosalind counted to 5. "Then we start tonight." They worked together for 10 days. Nell managed the shop and kept watch. Alistair brought records, deeds, transaction histories, correspondence he had obtained through means Rosalind decided not to question closely. Rosalind assembled the case, piece by piece, the way she assembled medicines. Precise ingredients, precise measurements, precise timing. She discovered that Ashworth had purchased not only the garden land, but 3 adjacent properties, all through Hargrove, all within 6 months. She found that the London physician had never held a proper license and had been paid £30 for his report. She found a letter, carelessly kept, arrogantly unstored, in which Ashworth instructed Hargrove to clear the Thorne woman from the property by any means that preserve appearances. "This is enough," Rosalind said. She had the documents spread across the shop counter. It was midnight. Alistair stood on the other side, and the candles between them burned without flickering. She counted the pages. 17. 17 pieces of a woman's greed made visible. "There is one problem," Alistair said. "Ashworth knows I am helping you. She will come to the assembly, and she will reveal what I am." Rosalind looked at him. "She cannot prove it." "She does not need to prove it. She only needs to say it in a room full of people who are already suspicious of a garden that blooms in December." He met her eyes. "If she exposes me, the investigation turns from your garden to what is in your garden, and why." The plan needed revision. Rosalind counted to 10 and began again. The night before the public review, she stood alone in the locked garden. She had climbed the wall because it was her garden and no piece of paper would keep her out, and pressed her hands into the soil beside the foxglove. 47 stems now, all blooming, all leaning toward the place where Alistair usually stood. "You have been keeping him alive," she said to the plants, "and he has been keeping you growing. And I have been standing in the middle of it for 7 years counting everything except the thing that mattered." She knew what the exchange required. The voluntary covenant needed something of equal value from both parties. He would give his secrecy, the 4 centuries of careful hiding, the anonymity that kept him safe. She would give her independence, not surrender it, but reshape it, opening her work and her garden and her counted, measured life to include someone who did not fit any category she had ever made. The assembly convened at the Guildhall on a Thursday. Rosalind counted the people in the room. 63. She counted the windows. 8. She counted the heartbeats she could feel. Her own, and somewhere behind her, the one that stuttered and paused and carried on, borrowed and stubborn. Lady Ashworth arrived in grey silk with Hargrove at her side. She looked at Rosalind the way she had in the shop, evaluating. Rosalind looked back and did not blink. Nell positioned herself near the door. "If this goes badly," she had said that morning, "I am prepared to be very loudly outraged. I have been practicing." Rosalind presented her case. She laid out the 17 documents. She named the physician and his lack of credentials. She traced the property purchases, one by one, all converging on her garden, all flowing through Hargrove, all leading back to Lady Ashworth. "This is not a public safety investigation," Rosalind said, standing straight in a room that had gone very quiet. "This is a campaign of acquisition conducted through forgery, manipulation, and institutional misuse. I count the evidence. I count the connections. I count the lies. There are 17 of them. Would the assembly like me to continue?" Ashworth stood. Her composure held, but Rosalind had learned to count the small things. The tightening at the corners of her mouth, the way her gloved hand pressed flat against the table. "Mrs. Thorne is deflecting," Ashworth said. "The real question is, what grows in that garden and who benefits from it? Ask her about her night visitor. Ask her about the man who comes after dark and leaves before dawn. Ask her what he is." The room stirred. Rosalind felt the shift, the old human instinct toward fear and suspicion, the eagerness to find something wrong in someone else's life. Alistair stepped forward from the back of the room. Every head turned. He walked the length of the hall with the unhurried gait of a man who had walked through centuries, and he stood beside Rosalind. Not in front. Beside. "My name is Alistair Vane," he said. "I am a patron of Mrs. Thorne's apothecary. I have purchased her medicines for years because they are effective and honestly made. Lady Ashworth wishes to suggest something sinister in that arrangement because it distracts from the evidence Mrs. Thorne has presented. I suggest the assembly examine the documents rather than the gossip." But Rosalind did not need him to finish the fight. She turned back to the room and said, "Lady Ashworth, I have one more document, a letter in your hand, instructing Lord Hargrove to, I will read the exact words, clear the Thorne woman from the property by any means that preserve appearances." She held it up. The room could see the handwriting. "I count this as the 18th piece of evidence. Shall I find a 19th, or is the assembly satisfied?" Nell, from the doorway, said clearly into the silence, "I am satisfied. Is anyone else not satisfied? Speak up. I will wait." No one spoke. Ashworth's face went smooth and blank, the look of someone who has run out of weapons and knows it. Hargrove was already edging toward the door. The assembly voted unanimously to dismiss the investigation, restore Rosalind's full access to her garden, and open an inquiry into Lady Ashworth's property acquisitions. Ashworth left without speaking. The room began to breathe again. Alistair looked at Rosalind. She looked at him. Between them, in the space where the foxglove was not, something settled into place. Not with drama, but with the quiet click of a key finding its lock. "I would like to renegotiate our terms," Rosalind said, loud enough for the room to hear but speaking only to him. "Name them," he said. "Equal partnership, voluntary, permanent. I keep my garden, my shop, and my habit of counting everything. You keep your peculiarities and your terrible knowledge of historical sage uses. We stop pretending this is a contractual obligation and call it what it is." "What is it?" he said, and his voice was rough in a way she had never heard from him. "It is a choice," she said. "Mine and yours, made freely, in front of 63 witnesses." He reached for her hand. His fingers were cold, hers were warm. The room watched. "I choose this," he said, simply, like a man who had waited 4 centuries to say 3 words and had finally found the right ones. Nell, from the doorway, wiped her eyes with the back of her flour-dusted hand and said, "Well, finally, I am going to need considerably more bread for this household." Spring came to Bath the way it always did, slowly, grudgingly, and then all at once on a Tuesday. The garden wall held the warmth of the afternoon sun. Rosalind knelt in the bed where the foxglove grew, thinning the seedlings with the careful attention of someone who understood that abundance required pruning. The voluntary covenant had settled into their lives the way the garden settled into its seasons, naturally, without fuss, with the deep inevitability of roots finding water. She felt his presence in the garden the way she felt the weather, a constant, a condition, a thing she no longer needed to count because it simply was. Alistair was repairing the cold frame. He had been repairing it for 3 days because he kept stopping to read the labels she had written for each bed, small wooden markers in her neat hand. Lavender, comfrey, foxglove, steady hearts. He had found that last one the first morning and had stood looking at it for a long time without speaking. Nell came through the garden gate with a basket of scones and a new ledger under her arm. "I have recounted the inventory," she announced. "We are low on chamomile, overstocked on valerian, because someone keeps growing it in places I have not approved. And I have taken the liberty of ordering new bottles from the glassworks because the old ones were a disgrace." "Thank you, Nell," Rosalind said. "Also, Mr. Vane, there is a woman at the front counter asking for foxglove tincture. She says she was referred by a friend. I have told her you are unavailable because you are pretending to repair a cold frame. Shall I continue the fiction?" Alistair set down his tools. "I will see to the customer," he said, with the particular gravity of a 400-year-old vampire accepting a shop errand. "Apron," Nell said, pointing. "You are representing the business." He put on the apron. It was too short for him and had a small embroidered sprig of foxglove on the pocket that Rosalind had stitched one evening, while he read aloud from a book of Ottoman botanical illustrations. He wore it without complaint. When he had gone inside, Nell sat on the bench and looked at Rosalind with the expression of a woman who has seen something she was not sure she would see. "He is good for you," Nell said, "and you are good for him, and I am good for both of you, which is why I am giving myself a raise. Do not argue. I have already written it in the ledger." Rosalind laughed. It came up from somewhere deep, the kind of laugh she had not known she was saving. That evening, after the shop was closed and Nell had gone home and the garden was turning blue with dusk, Rosalind stood among the foxglove and counted the stems. 51. Every one of them blooming, every one leaning slightly toward the potting shed where Alistair was washing the day's bottles with the quiet competence of a man who had finally found work worth doing. He came out drying his hands on the apron and stood beside her. The foxglove swayed between them. The air smelled of earth and green things growing, and the clean cold that always surrounded him, which she had stopped noticing as strange and started noticing as his. 51, she said. "Is that good?" "It is the most I have ever grown. I think the garden is showing off for you." He looked at the foxglove, and then at her, and the expression on his face was the one she had been counting since the first almost smile. Open, unguarded, the face of a man who had stopped bracing for loss. "Rosalind," he said, "what number are you on now?" She thought about it. The counting, her anchor, her measure, her way of holding the world steady. She had counted everything since she was old enough to know that numbers did not lie. But standing in the garden, with the foxglove blooming and the dusk settling, and his cold hand finding her warm one, she realized she had lost track for the first time in her life. "I have lost count," she said. He smiled, a real one. She counted it. One, and then stopped counting, because some things were better left unmeasured. From inside the shop, a bottle clinked against the shelf where Nell had reorganized the inventory. The sound was so ordinary, so perfectly domestic, that Rosalind leaned into him and said, "We need more chamomile." "I will plant it tomorrow," he said. "Before dawn?" "Before dawn." The garden grew around them, steady and uncountable, and entirely, stubbornly alive.